forest field on mountainside.
Hi, I'm Fraser Douglas, and I've been an avid tent camper now for 55 years. Over these 55 years, I've come to realize that every tent camper needs to have a utility knife handy so that they can cut rope, slice some food, open packages, and perhaps whittle a small piece of wood. But there are so many choices, it's hard to know which one is best for your particular needs. So in this video, I want to describe folding camp and scout utility knives, and then explain why this Victorinox Sportsman is my favorite camp utility knife. Hope you enjoy this video. Pioneer outdoorsmen have always known that they needed a general utility knife to help them deal with the many possible problems that could emerge in an outdoor living or camping situation. But when you start looking for a camp utility knife, you'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of different options. How do you pick the one that's best for your needs? When selecting a utility knife, you must first decide what sorts of things you want to do with that knife. If you want to process and carve wood, then you'll need a thick blade knife. But if you only intend to open packages and perhaps cut food occasionally, then you'll need a much thinner blade knife. I chose a thinner blade knife, and I used my axe and saw to process my firewood. The second thing to decide is how long the blade should be. Over the past 25 years, most outdoorsmen have agreed that the blade length of a utility knife doesn't need to be more than about 5 inches. The third decision is whether that knife should have a fixed blade or a folding blade. About half of the outdoorsmen I know like a fixed blade, and about half of them like a folding blade. Each has some strengths and some limitations. Personally, I prefer a folding blade. If you decide on a folding knife, then you got to decide if you just want a knife blade or do you want some extra tools. Over the years, I have frequently had to make emergency repairs to gear in my campsite and have discovered that the tools that are typically found on a Swiss Army knife, a Scout knife, or a multi-tool are helpful for solving these problems. And finally, you must decide how you plan to carry your knife: in your pocket, in a pouch on your belt, or in a pouch around your neck. A belt carry is not an option for me because I frequently wear shorts and pants without belts, and so I usually carry my knife in my pocket. But when I'm camping, I frequently like to wear it around my neck, where it's handy. After narrowing my knife choices down, it seems like I have 3 basic options: a Swiss Army knife, an American Scout or camp knife, and a multi-tool. Let's examine each of these options in more detail. The first Swiss Army knife, called the Swiss Soldier's Knife Model 1890, was first produced in Switzerland by the Karl Elsener Knife Factory in 1891. It was a 2-layer knife that had 2 tools on each end. On one end was a 2 3/4 inch utility knife blade and a screwdriver that was used to disassemble rifles for cleaning. On the other end was a lobster claw style can opener that was used to open canned foods, and an awl that was used to punch holes in leather and canvas equipment. 7 years later, the Elsener Knife Factory introduced the Swiss Officer's Knife that replaced the awl with a second, smaller knife blade and added that awl plus a corkscrew to the back of the knife. In the next 20 years, Elsener renamed his knife factory to Victorinox Knife Company and a second Swiss Army Knife Company, Wenger Knife Factory, emerged as a strong competitor. Over the next 100 years, these two companies produced over 100 different Swiss Army knife models, having varying combinations of over 50 different tools. Three of the more popular tools were the saw blade, the scissors, and the pliers. In 2005, the Victorinox Company bought out the Wenger Company and merged their knife models. Several years ago, I bought about 3 of the larger multi-layer Swiss Army knives, but quickly concluded that they were too big to carry in my pocket, and the largest knife I wanted to carry was a 2-layer knife. Today, the Victorinox Company offers 10 2-layer Swiss Army knife models that are slight variations of the original soldier's knife and officer's knife. All 10 models have a spear point knife blade, an improved can opener with a small flathead tip that can be used for Phillips head screws, and a flathead screwdriver that has a bottle cap lifter and a wire stripper. They differ primarily in terms of their length, their fourth tool, and their extra tools. The first 3 knives are all about 3.5 inches long. The Pioneer is a modern version of the old soldier's knife. The Spartan is a modern version of the old officer's knife, plus a toothpick and tweezers. And the Tinker is a variation of the Spartan with a Phillips head screwdriver instead of a corkscrew. I discovered the Tinker back in 1995 and carried it in my pocket every day for about 25 years. In camp, I frequently used most of these tools. I used the toothpick several times a day. I used the tweezers to remove splinters from my hand. I used the awl to trim an ingrown toenail. And back in the day when I was riding my motorcycle, I used the can opener frequently to open my tin cans. But I never found a good use for that second knife blade, and I rarely used the Phillips head screwdriver because I couldn't get a good torque when I was trying to tighten or unloosen a screw. The last 7 knives on this list are all about 3.25 inches long. The Evo 10 and 11 incorporate several features from the old Wenger knives. I discovered this Evo 11 about a year ago, and I really liked it because it has a file instead of that second knife blade, and I use that file to trim my nails several times a week. And I should add that I really like that smaller 3.25 inch length. It doesn't look much smaller, but it sure feels a lot smaller in your hand and in your pocket. But I still couldn't find a good use for that Phillips head screwdriver. The last 5 knives on this list are even smaller, and they really feel good in my pocket. The smallest of these knives is the Cadet, with the A-locks handles, the file, and no extra tools. But while doing research for this video, I discovered the Sportsman, and it is now my favorite camp utility knife. The corkscrew can be used not only to open an occasional bottle of wine, but it is a great tool for untying jam knots and for tightening leather laces. For more information about family tent camping gear, please check out my website, moderntentcamping.com. A link is provided in the discussion below. And while you're there, check out my Amazon store page, where you'll find links to products that I have found especially useful on my camping trips. Now let's talk about a few American-made camp, scout, military, utility knives. Soon after the Swiss factories began making the soldiers' and officers' knives, several American companies began to make very similar 2-layer knives. Most of these knives were called camp knives or scout knives, but some of them were called U.S. Army knives, U.S. Navy knives, Medical Corps knives, demolition knives, and utility knives. Most of these knives were two-layer knives with two tools on each end. A spear point knife blade and a screwdriver with a cap lifter on one end and a can opener and an awl on the other end. Here is a partial list of those American factories with their approximate dates of operation. The first Boy Scout knife was produced in 1911 by the New York Knife Company. It was very similar to the old Swiss soldier's knife, except it had a heavier frame, metal bolsters on each end, and a jigged bovine bone handle scales. I got my first Scout knife around 1957 when I was in the Boy Scouts, and I took it on a few scouting camping trips. But I found it to be too large, too heavy, and too rough to carry in my pocket every day. This Camillus Scout knife from around 1955 is very similar to my first Scout knife. I would have preferred a junior Scout knife such as this Case Junior Scout knife, but I didn't know they existed back then. Unfortunately, most of these American companies have closed, and most Camp Scout knives are now made in China or other foreign countries. This is a modern utility knife made by Leatherman. I like the fact that the screwdrivers are end drivers and that carabiner can also be used to open bottle caps, but there is no can opener, and I do not like that serrated knife blade. And now let's look at a few multi-tools. The Leatherman Company began making multi-tools in Portland, Oregon around 1983. After a few years, I began to hear other outdoorsmen talking about these Leatherman tools, and so I finally bought this juice around 1995. Like most other Leatherman tools, the Juice main tool is either a pair of pliers or a pair of scissors, but it also has a knife blade, a few screwdriver tips, and a couple of other tools. Although it appears to be about the same size as a two-layer Swiss Army knife and a Scout knife, it is considerably heavier and would be uncomfortable for pocket carry and seems better suited for a belt carry. And so we packed this multi-tool in our car so that it's handy when we're traveling, and I bought this squirt with pliers as the main tool. It's better suited for carrying in my pocket, but the knife blade is too small to be practical. This multi-tool by Victorinox has a very nice knife blade and a nice pair of pliers, but it is much too heavy to carry in your pocket. But it's a great tool for repairing a lot of camping gear, and so we pack it in our tool bag. In sum, I like the size, the weight, the smooth handles, and the tools of this Victorinox Sportsman. I believe that this is the perfect camp utility knife for my needs. But if your needs are different, I hope that this video will help you pick out the knife that best fits those needs. Thanks for watching. Before concluding, I want to tell you that much of the information that I've presented in this video I learned from Hobie on YouTube. If you're interested in these Camp Scout utility knives, you need to check out his YouTube channel.
Take more trips, travel further, visit more attractions, and spend less money. Go tent camping.
Good grub cooking on a fire tonight. Pack up your tent and ride.